All right, welcome back to ABA Exam Review and the continuation of our RBT Practice Exam series, where we're going through another set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. When you pass your exam, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shoutout. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. Henry frequently parks in a parking spot labeled no parking. Yesterday, he received a ticket. Henry paid the ticket, which cost him $200, so Henry stopped parking in that spot. What changed Henry's behavior? Now, let's be careful here, right? We know Henry is frequently parking in this parking spot labeled no parking. Yesterday, he got a ticket. Now, if we're looking at Henry's behavior, we know the behavior of interest is parking in that spot. So we've got to look at what changed Henry's behavior. Yes, he got the ticket, but we know once he paid the ticket, it cost him $200. So getting the ticket wasn't necessarily what changed the behavior. Once he had to pay the $200 and he lost the $200, then his behavior changed. So once something was taken away from him, that punished him because we know the behavior decreased. He stopped parking in that spot. So if we know Henry's behavior decreased, then it has to be punishment or extinction. And if we know the consequence was the removal of something from Henry, the $200, what changed Henry's behavior? A, positive punishment. Now we're not focused on the ticket. Yes, he received the ticket, but the behavior was paying the ticket, and the consequence was losing $200. And the loss of the $200 directly attributed to Henry stopping parking in that spot. So the removal is negative and the reduction is punishment. So B looks like our best answer. When we look at C and D, those are both reinforcement, and we know reinforcement increases behavior. Henry stopped parking in that spot. His behavior decreased. It couldn't have been reinforcement. The removal of the $200 punished Henry. So what changed Henry's behavior? B, negative punishment. Be very precise about what consequence you're looking at. You want to teach your son how to get the mail and place it on a specific spot on the kitchen counter. If you want to use a chaining procedure to teach this skill, what is the very first thing you need to do? So we have a chaining question, and it's asking about the very first thing we need to do if we want to use a chaining procedure. We know we want to teach your son how to get mail and place it on the kitchen counter. But before we can do any of that, before we can teach it using a chaining procedure, before we can design a chaining procedure, what do we have to do? What is the first thing we do when we want to use chaining? A, start with the last step in the chain, which is place the mail on the counter. Do we know these steps in the chain yet? We don't. So even B, start with the first step in the chain, which is walk outside. A would be backwards, B would be forward, but we don't even know the steps yet. We just know we want the behavior of get the mail, put it on a spot. What do we call it when we take a behavior and we create a chain? Well, we use a task analysis. So before any chaining procedure can take place, we've got to identify the steps through a task analysis. So when we look at C, start to identify the steps required to complete the skill, that's what we're going to try to do. Before any chaining can take place, we've got to know what steps are we using. And then D, model the steps for your son. D has the same problem as A and B. We don't know the steps yet. We know what we want to accomplish. We know we want to use chaining, but until we have the steps, we can't teach anything. The very first thing we need to do is C. Start to identify the steps required to complete the skill, and that's going to be done with a task analysis. You're planning to play golf in the morning. When you check the weather report, you notice there might be some light rain. You decide that you are going to bring a cover for your golf clubs to block any rain. The weather report was done what relative to the golf club cover? Even me, as you notice, sometimes I'm reading too quickly. And we can't read too quickly. We want to read carefully, and we want to attack the question. So I read too quickly. I'm going to slow down and just attack the question. The question wants to know, what did the weather report do relative to the golf club cover? Well, we know we're going to play golf in the morning, and you saw the weather report and saw rain. What did that do? What made you decide you're going to bring a cover for your golf clubs to block any rain? How did the weather report change the value of that golf club cover? And when we're talking about motivating operations, this is what we're talking about. A motivating operation is going to change the value of something. In this case, you always have access to the cover, but only when you saw that rain was likely did you want to bring the cover. So that weather report did what to that golf club cover? A, increased the value temporarily. Yes. Think about a motivating operation, which is an antecedent, as making you want something more or want something less. Did the weather report telling you it was going to rain make you want the cover more or less? Well, it made you want the cover more. It temporarily increased the value. Tomorrow, if it's not going to rain, then that golf club cover's value goes back to normal. But since it is going to rain, there's motivation to grab that golf club cover. B, decrease the value temporarily. So if the weather report said it's going to be sunny, 0 chance of rain, well, the cover might not change in value, but it might have decreased in value. There's no reason to bring the cover. And that's what antecedent motivating operations can do. They change the value of doing something or gaining something or getting rid of something. C, acted as a reinforcer for the cover, or D, acted as a punisher for the cover. Well, the weather report was an antecedent, and a reinforcer and a punisher will always be consequences. So identifying where we're at in the behavior contingency, in this case, we're dealing with the antecedents, you're never going to pick reinforcer or punisher when you're dealing with antecedents. So we're dealing with an antecedent weather report that increased the value of this cover because it's going to rain. So what did the weather report do relative to the golf club cover? It increased the value temporarily. Think about motivating operations as making you want something or not want something. Billy is working on his forehand in tennis. He wants to focus on putting more, putting more balls in play instead of hitting balls. Billy is working on his forehand in tennis. He wants to focus on putting more balls in play instead of hitting balls that are considered out. If Billy wants to know how many balls he hit in play, what measurement would be least efficient at providing this information? So first, we know it's a measurement question, and measurement is typically chosen based on what we're trying to accomplish or what we're trying to learn. Here, we're trying to learn what? Well, Billy is working on his forehand, and he wants to put more balls in play. Specifically, he wants to know how many balls he hit into play. When you see a phrase like how many, immediately you start thinking, okay, I'm trying to count something because I want to know how many times something occurred. And when we're trying to count something, first thing I think of is frequency. Now, this question, it wants to know what's going to be the least efficient way to gather this information. Not necessarily the best way, but the least efficient way at gathering this information. And if we want something that's going to be least efficient at getting a count, well, I'm leaning more towards something like duration or interresponse time that measures a length of time. So if we look at A, rate. Rate is a specific case because we are getting a frequency with rate, and then we're adding a time component. But rate is going to be pretty good at letting us know how many balls were hit in play, and specifically per hour or maybe per practice session. Rate is a good way to find out a count. What about B, inter-response time? Well, inter-response time is what I was just discussing when I said I try to avoid duration or time measurements if I want to count. Can we get how many balls he hit in play from an inter-response time? It's possible. It's just not necessarily going to be very efficient because inter-response time is going to measure time in between responses, not necessarily each time it occurs. C, frequency is going to be probably the best way, the easiest way, because we're just counting how many times it occurs. Same thing with D. Event recording is essentially just another way to say frequency. Event recording records every time something happens. So every time a ball is hit in play, we would mark it as, let's say, 1 or give it a tally mark. If we're looking for the least efficient way to get a count, well, inter-response time is likely going to be that answer because inter-response time is going to give us a length of time. And this question wants to know specifically the least efficient way to get how many balls. Well, that's going to be B, inter-response time. A whole interval measurement procedure for intervals of 1 minute would require that the response occur for the entire minute, or else it would not count as a response. This measurement will likely blank behavior. So let's think about this. We have kind of an open-ended question. The measurement's going to do what to the behavior? We know we have a whole interval procedure, and we're looking at intervals of 1 minute. And with whole interval, as it says, the response has to occur the entire minute, or it doesn't count as a response. So let's think of an example. Let's say I'm using these 1 minute intervals, and my behavior happens for 58 seconds. Does that interval count as a response? No. Let's say that happens 10 times in a row, 58 seconds. If you go back and look at the data are going to show 0 responses, even though that behavior happened an awful lot. So when you're using a whole interval measurement procedure, what is likely to happen to the behavior? A, underestimate. Yes, the measurement is likely to underestimate the behavior because, given our example, if the behavior happens for 58 seconds, but it has to happen for 1 minute, or using a whole interval, we're not going to count it as a response. So we're going to underestimate how often that behavior is actually occurring. What about B, overestimate? When you're looking at overestimate, you're thinking more along the lines of a partial interval measurement. Because with partial interval, it just has to happen for a split second. So if that behavior happens for 1 second, it's going to count the same as if it happened for 1 minute with the partial interval procedure. So that's why we've got to be careful with these discontinuous measurement procedures because they can very easily underestimate and overestimate behavior. What about C, both under and overestimate? This is more along the lines of the momentary time sampling, where it could either under or overestimate, depending on when the behavior is occurring. And then D, neither under or overestimate. Well, if you're going to use discontinuous, you're always going to run the risk of underestimating or overestimating the behavior. There's still a time and a place for discontinuous, but there's a reason it's typically less accurate than continuous. So if we're going to use a whole interval measurement procedure, it's likely to underestimate the occurrence of that behavior. Thanks for watching. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. Be sure to subscribe and let us know when you pass. Work hard, study hard. See you.